one more round of applause for our 3 poets so far. Thank you so much for sharing your art with us. And so now we have, last but absolutely not least, our featured poet, Crisosto Apache. Crisosto Apache is originally from Mescalero, New Mexico, on the Mescalero Apache Reservation, and currently lives in the Denver metro area in Colorado with their spouse. They are Mescalero Apache, Chiricahua Apache, and Dene of the Salt Clan, born for the Towering House Clan, and are an assistant professor of English. They hold an MFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Crisosto's debut collection, Genesis, Lost Alphabet, and their second collection is Ghostword, out by Gnashing Teeth Publication. Their profile can be seen on the Poetry Foundation's website, and if you would like to see their work in person, we also have a couple of their books on display in our reading gallery, and they're also selling their book today, so please contact them if you love their work, and I know you will. So please give it up for Crisosto.
My throat got a little dry. Good evening. Again, first of all, I'd like to thank Tim and Emily for putting this event together, for inviting all the writers to share their writing with us, and also for East Window for providing the space for us to share our work. Writing. A lot of times for me it's a curse. So I have 2 books. My first book is Genesis Redacted, and then my second book, which was released in the end of October, is called Ghostword, put out by Gnashing Teeth Publication, and I'll talk a little bit about them when I start reading. I'm going to read a couple of poems from my first book, Genesis Redacted. The title behind the book or the collection is kind of following the idea of the Bible Genesis, but I redacted it to kind of take back that sense of an emergence, like a self-emergence, which the book or the Bible really kind of talks about from a spiritual point. But this is really my own testament of my own path of spirituality. The book is highly experimental, so for me, in creating this book was kind of a maze. But the thread of the book sort of has a special meaning for me because the idea really came from this conversation with me and my mother. I was very curious as to what she was doing and where she was going during the time that she was carrying me for the 9 months. So it was a very interesting conversation. So the thread of the book, the 9 months, is really that kind of conversation with an ideal of what my mom was, where my mother was at. One of the other things that I coupled with that, sort of to bring tension to those moments, is I did some research in the year that she was carrying me and found that there was a lot of lunar launches and also nuclear testing during that year. So I thought that was kind of provocative in terms of being in gestation and then looking at what was happening in the world. So, did I say this book was highly experimental? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have to kind of remind myself of that. So this first poem I'm going to read is called Synapse. And the idea behind it is like a dream. It comes from a dream. Like Tammy said, these poems come in the middle of the night, so I woke up, ran to my desk, and wrote this poem. Synapse. Encased linings waves against your skin, sweltering, not swelling, not moving beyond taction, or that saddling abode of breath, which pushes against a gilt embroider or a sarcophagus, maybe a chrysalis. Cufflinks secure a phonic breath, in crisscrossing singed hands, another absence of your breath, no exclamations to butterfly wings, no trembling to hummingbirds. Your moon-written word, your sun phrases form, water delineates the swirling vacuum of air and whispering gasps. Your eyes widen on eaves, awake. From last night, water ripples from fountain drops, Iron wrench turns in a clockwise creak. Sighs decease and decompress. Counterclockwise increase your aspirate surge. Droplet cushions and form quickening moss, ever thickening at the base. A black glistening liquid undulates with slow currents, splaying glissades of ebbs by plummeting into your chest cavity. Every breath hastens its impact, a cacophony of murmurs, soft kisses on your desiccant forehead, forsaking within the last glottal frill, never leaving your sneer, a cadaver's smiling gaze. The night before, a labyrinth of crude bathroom stalls lining up in each coffer edifice, emanate an echo of moans and dispels a small voice among lit lamps flickers. Night after night, these reoccurrences do not fade against the brown rust slippage of liquid language. Sitting on the edge of your lips, verdigris procures a sludge of latent memory, sacred to turquoise at dusk. That same dusk, your body is left in a margin of cornfield and merging roadway. Your head faces south, tilting just enough to see that reoccurrence disappear in a gleam of red taillights. You again, again, and again. Until the next morning, as the sun swells with pink linings, it bereaves the sound of doves taking flight, hushing the shrills of sitting thrush. So yeah, that was from a dream, and it really is a reoccurring dream that I had, and I was always very mystified by that. And at the end of the dream, I always ended with like me laying in this cornfield with a car going past the road, and all I could see was the gleam of the red from the stop, and I could hear the wheels kind of coming to that screech. This one is called Double Helix, for my biological parents and brother. So this is what I'm calling the bottom half of my chromosome poem. So if you can see it. There's an upper half that's in this book as well, but it's also published in the anthology that's outside. It's called In Days Sun, Two of Me. But this one is Double Helix for my biological parents and brother. Shema, Shika, joining together, later separating, somewhere, sometime, before their whispers, tress, underneath an underpass on I-25, southbound, they vowed never to forget. She held onto us like taut memories. He woke every morning like loosened prayers, the two of them intertwining, setting a chain reaction toward eternal division of chromosomes divided by erroneous, eminent plateaus, entrenching basins and dislodged mountains, ranges, they managed to inhale the same docile air. There is nothing complicated between them. The only ever-gaping space between them, although we derive from identical ruptures of fluid, we all grow intrinsically further and further apart, credulous like driftwood, wafting upon murky, irrigate pools, binge drinking, drug overdoses, violent beatings, late night hitchhikers, survival and poverty, childless, traumatic denial, IHS visits, DUI checkpoint, virulent empty houses, regurgitating head, lamp shining, opaque-like, misty fog angel, she, kiss. So Shema is translated into my mother, and Shita is my father, and then Shikis is my brother. I'm going to read the last poem of this book, and it really is like really the day of my birth. Once again, a full moon positions itself between the earth and sun, absorbing all the glory of its rays emanating. Satellite launches for the first time into Earth's orbit, and one lunar capsule plunges into the sea. Life emerges. Gul'i, my birth. August 1st, 1971 to August 7th, 1971. Emergent emanation from birth, like a cosset lamb, he is placed inside a shoebox, no constitution of place, towards t'ah, cradleboard, towards kwa, huan, home, towards ndebikeya, homelands, towards ndebiya bizat, denebizat, language, life acquisition towards identity, X. Appune to Moscow gatherers, burnt wood gatherers, sheep harvesters. After salt is extinct, towering houses topple. A return to origin, beginning, center fire, home, whirling. Then it's Agu, August says everything ripens. 1971, Da'ashkedan, Adajindi. This has been said from the beginning. So, Af is cradleboard in both Navajo and Apache. Quan and Huan is home, both in Apache and Navajo. Ndebikeya and Denebikeya is homeland, both Navajo and Apache. Ndebizat. And Denebizat is language in both Apache and Navajo. And then Agu is the description for the month of August, which means everything ripens. And Adajindi is a phrase that we always tell ourselves to remind that we are human beings, and that has always been said from the very beginning. Okay, so I'm going to read several poems from my new book. This book has been kind of a pain in my side, but I am very glad that the book has come out in print, because it really has been a struggle to write this book, mostly because I see the book more as like an autobiographical structure of my life. So a lot of things I write about in this book are somewhat true. But what I did is I used the writer, Japanese 1920 modernist writer, Ryanosuke Akutagawa, who wrote his last manuscript called A Fool's Life. He wrote that manuscript as he committed suicide, and it took him about 3 hours to die. So I kind of took that, not the event itself, but the time frame, to sort of look at at my life and see what I might write as a last will and testament, really. The process failed, which is why the book is in 3 sections. The first section is my first attempt, the second section is the second attempt. The third is when I got interested in his writing, so I went and read as many books and stories that I could find. A lot of his work is really out of print, so it took me a long time to find work in print to read. I was able to find some stuff on the internet, but the carbon copy that I was given back in 1990 from my professor, Arthur Z. at the time, I carried that around for a number of years, and by the time I was finished with it, it was like brown and curled on, it had a lot of folds and stuff in it. So it survived. But when I finally found a copy of the book, I was really happy, for which I finished the book. So with each of the entries, I used a quote from the book. So I will start out with those quotes to set the idea, and then the poem will follow. Some of the titles correspond or mimic or are the same as the original, so it just kind of worked out that way. Number 1, the pages. Quote, "For a time, from the ladder's top, he had been watching them," unquote. R. Akutagawa, number 1, The Age. Now, more than 25 years ago, making my passage a wandering maid confining words through a folded anthemium, a dark place, old as fingers, turning the paper shells of overused lines on shelves, discovering more of those names calling from beyond the mountains, from beyond the sea, from beyond the madness and disheveling confessions. Reputations of tousled vowels led them into a deep lull of flat slivers, smelling of mold and depleted decay, sifting through each repeating voice in a tenacious howl. Oh, the mountains of Hanshan, oh, the disobedience of Milton, oh, the insanity of Poe, and the many woes of Plath, each full of the sinking glares. If I still feel small against them, then for that small moment in my life, I can sense the inure stutter toward each word of Anglo utterance, and forget I ever heard calling their names, leaning into them as twilight learns into its coming dread. Those names remain a decade blur of my pages, a forsaken twilight, unlike my unframing beginning, Ikhtidan. My own half-century's end is still undetermined. This next one is called 18 Luna. Quote, "Following with her eyes, they hadn't even a nodding acquaintance. He felt a loneliness such he'd never known," unquote. R. Akutagawa, number 18, Moon. "My eyes will wince against the bright light because they cannot help it. The involuntary reaction in the widening iris reacts uncontrollably by the mind which will always determine its dilation. My skin, on the other hand, has difficulty in stealing its confirmation to its moving action, which will never avert a glare by errant light, forcing onto its constricting skin. Though I have sat in the forgiving light many times, an epidural attraction of living in that same chiaroscuro always leaves me in a seemingly self-contained loneliness." So this next poem, again, I had a lot of conversations with my mother. She was kind of a delight to really talk with. She was a conversationalist. And these dialogues, she was able to tell me a lot of stories. And so through those stories, I kind of hold on to some of the memories of my family. It's hard to know who these people are now because I've been living off the reservation for some time. I still am in communication with my immediate family, but the longer I stay out here, the more difficult it gets. But this poem is dedicated to my uncle Edgar de Kluge, who had come back from Vietnam in 1971. And my mom told me about, because she and him were very close, and he used to be a very happy man before he left, but as you can tell by war, they never come back the same way. So that story really stuck with me, just because I've known my uncle, and every time I see him when I go back home, I would talk with him. So this poem is dedicated to him. Number 12, Carrizo, for Edgar de Kluge. Quote, "The submarines inside was dim," unquote. R. Akutagawa, number 12, Naval Base. In my youth, I hitched a ride to San Diego, across chirping desert and distant night. I gazed upon a slow-moving dark encasing a convex cerulean cavity. Each night I stood beneath the sky for hours, mesmerized at the perplexing reformatory of twinkling lights and broken glass fragments spreading against the glistening sunset. A faceless man behind a lost reflection of a glass at a drive-up window informs me, "Too bad, you know nothing of your past." How far will I walk against the night, confirming to this captivity I had never realized? Some years later, under the kitchen table, they all huddle as the rampage continues toward the back of the house. A clash of debris crashing from the other room recoils, and broken sounds escape the barricade of doors. All I remember is returning in 1970. All they remember is me sitting on the edge of my bed with the war still in my hands. So this one is called Slumber, number 16. Again, it's kind of a dream sequence. Quote, "That even such a pillow might house a centaur, he didn't even seem to realize," unquote, Arakagawa, number 16, pillow. In a dream, I remember how to slay a sheep. A careful slit, more than just a nick, leaves it more relaxed than before. I caress its velvet ear and whisper empty blessings into the funnel chasm, waiting for its voice to mutter back at me until it shudders and finally stops moving. In my waking dream, I forget. In another sleep, I clench a pillow tight, not knowing the clench against my neck, desperately sputtering and repeating the dying words of my empty dream. Until one has loved an animal, a part of one's soul remains unawakened. Something Atoll France wrote. His writing was kind of interesting. Atoll France. It's a lot of his philosophy. I don't know if people are familiar with his work. Here's one that's just a memory, kind of a funny memory for me. It's short. Number 45, Jewel Box. Quote, "Born a eunuch," unquote, R. Akutagawa, 45, The Divan. When my mother was away and my brothers were outside playing with cousins, I would break into my mother's room and fumble for her jewel box. I just couldn't help myself. I would begin the quick, squirrely ritual, adorning myself in shells, silver, and turquoise, desperately trying to recognize the person staring back at me in the large dresser mirror. I seem to have done that a lot when I was a kid, just to wrap a towel on my head and kind of prance before the mirror. It's kind of funny. I'll read one more. This one is for my father. This poem was inspired from my father as he was dying. He drank a lot during his lifetime, so during that process it made him blind, and he also lost the functioning of his kidneys, so he was on dialysis for the latter part of his life. My sisters on my dad's side gave me a call one time and said that I should come down because it was sort of at the end of his life. So I went down and really spent that week because he decided to discontinue the dialysis process. So we were there until his end. So this poem just kind of came to me as I remembered that memory. Sleep, for my father Alfred. Quote, "But as long as there was darkness, he believed in light that went with it," unquote, Arakagawa, Cogwheels, number 5, Chaco. In sleep, summer dawns a shift, from slumbering eyes struggling to open, trying to remain joined with us. Distant birds bicker above roadways where awes of emergency vehicles shrill against the dying, dark, igneous mesas. There is a dream and a time for resting on a long hillside where his bed opens to a widespread meadow under the overpass. Irreversible, he sighs. Gone are my ills. Beyond the cranes flies away from benevolence. Specks of rain begin to splash gallantly inside the elegant cupping plumes of wet deerweed. From afar, the light fights to enter the eyelids as a forgotten word shifts out and unwritten. Thank you. So just in conclusion, I thought this was something that I really wanted to work on with my publisher in putting together this book, is that in the very back of the book, there are 10 reflective questions about the content. So I thought that would help sort of have conversation with what was written in the book. Questions? Yes.
When you write a book of poems, do you see it all as one big poem, or just individuals that fall together?
At first, I don't see it that way, but my process has changed a little bit now. What I've done is I'm always writing. You know, I'll think about something and I'll write it and I'll put it in that respective folder. So I have like several projects working at once. Right now, I'm completing my third manuscript, which is called Isness, which I'm sort of referring to this idea of momentary poems. So each poem is sort of about focusing on the moment as opposed to memory or anything like that. But yes, I mean, at first they don't start off like that as a book or anything like that. It's as it builds, I start to see like it coming together. But that's not to say that one of the projects that I'm working on called Swift Cinder, I'm looking at that as it's like a book poem. It's a much longer piece. I think you can read excerpts from that from Transmotion. It's a literary journal out of the UK. Yeah, and you might find links on my website to that. Okay, thank you.
What was one of the questions in your book that you want us to at the end there, you want us to discover?
No, just like... So number 6, it says, yellow is an important color in the Muscalero Apache culture. Its significance is tied to the role of corn pollen, which is held sacred and connected to ceremonial traditions. As a mean of anointment, look at times when yellow is a key color, given its significance. How do I use the color to alter or develop the understanding of the pieces? Well, yellow does come up a lot in this collection, and it's really weird because I've used that color yellow because it does have a heavy tie to our ceremonial practices. We believe that pollen is the equivalent of holy water, basically. Is that if you anoint yourself with it, that it carries the blessing through fertility, through the renewment or of the land, of everything. Because pollen is kind of one of those things. And throughout my life, I've kind of just had a hard time reckoning with that, because anytime I see that color, I have to kind of think about my connection to that. How do I see blessing? How do I relate to that idea of blessing? And a lot of it, I think, for me is historical. Yeah.
So that made me think of a question. So within your writing, do you try to evoke all the senses? Is that your aim for the reader?
I think I have to, which is why I call it a curse. Because, I mean, when I'm sitting there trying to think of a poem, well, not really think of a poem, but have the poem sort of direct me as to how it wants to come out, I really have to consider like how that's going to then not only go through me, go onto the page, but how that's going to lift itself to somebody engaging in the work. And I think because a lot of things are very autobiographical in this book, that's why it was very difficult for me to write. And so how am I going to make these decisions about what I'm writing about personal situations and have that relate to somebody else as opposed to just seeing the tragedy within the writing. A lot of it was, looking at Akutagawa's work and seeing that his struggle, which is essentially was this idea of erasure. Through his writing and through his academic pursuits, he really didn't ever see himself as an equal to any of his colleagues. In fact, he was very judgmental about himself, and he also struggled with mental illness. So this idea in his academic pursuits, he kind of went away from that and kind of locked himself away in his room and then just began to focus on his writing. But he also had trouble of accepting that as well. So he really tried to get away from this idea of existence. But for me, on the other hand, I was trying to push myself for discovery or the sense of belonging. So I think that those cultural ties is what I'm looking for.
You said part of your poetry is autobiographical, biographical. How much would you say of you is in it?
I think 100% of me is in it because I constructed it. But I think as far as approach, I would say probably 80%, 85% of myself is in it as far as what is occurring. Yeah.
Do you have a specific audience in mind when you do that?
I think my audience I really choose are people who really think beyond the scope of what's just obvious. Because I think in terms of my own perspective and the amount of energy I put into my writing, that's essentially what I'm doing, is I'm really pushing that boundary and not really just stating something that, okay, well this is bad. But in what ways is it bad? How do we think other people would see that it's bad, right? So I think looking at people who might want to push those boundaries. Well, thank you.